In this video, we introduce what are called me verbs. So we're going to do this mostly by way of you actively engaging some material, both review material and then listening to some things I'm going to tell you about me verbs, and then doing a review quiz, and then practicing parsing me verbs on your own with me confirming the answers for you. So you should have your whiteboards handy because we're going to be using them 3 different times in this video, starting with a review quiz here. So this review quiz is of indicative verbs that you have already been dealing with throughout the course of the semester. So this all has nothing to do with me verbs yet. So if you've read the chapter in Black's Grammar, don't be thinking about that material as you answer these questions. Be thinking about indicative verbs with respect to what's called the omega conjugation, those forms that we have already learned. We'll talk more about the omega conjugation in just a moment. So be thinking about these answers not with respect to the new material, but with respect to review material. And what this is going to do is some of the concepts that are contained in these questions and the answers to these questions are going to be a springboard for us to address this large class of verbs called me verbs. So go ahead, pause the video here on your whiteboard, number 1 through 5, and answer these questions, and I'm going to go ahead and do the same thing. All right, we need a high five for our work here. 1, 2, 3, boom. 5 questions. All may seem sort of like a hodgepodge of material, not drawn from any one lesson in particular, but there is a thread that ties these all together, and it's that they all relate to what we're going to see with some information about me verbs. So, number 1, what 2 things characterize the perfect indicative verbs? This is going to be reduplication at the beginning of the verb, and that's going to come in different forms as question number 4 here, the answer to question number 4 here is going to indicate. But then also the kappa alpha tense morpheme is going to be our other characteristic of the perfect in the indicative mood. Which indicative tenses, and remember only indicative tenses are going to take an augment, only the indicative mood is going to take the augment. Augment will not occur in the other moods such as the infinitive, participles, imperatives, or subjunctives. The indicative tenses that will take an augment are going to be the past tenses, namely imperfect, aorist, and if you put pluperfect here, that's also the right answer, though we don't see the pluperfect very often in the Greek New Testament. The present active indicative first person singular ending is omega, and so the main class of verbs that we have learned so far are called omega conjugation verbs, and that is because of this fact right here, that their present active indicative first person singular ending is omega. So me verbs are going to be a class of verbs that take not omega as this ending, but me. And so they take their name from that fact. The perfect tense reduplicates in 3 different ways. Consonantal reduplication, which is the most common and sort of the most obvious, is the reduplication of a consonant with an epsilon stuck in there after it. And then the epsilon reduplication is an epsilon added to the beginning of a verb stem that looks a whole lot like an augment, as does the lengthening of an initial vowel of a verb. So if a verb stem begins with a vowel, that vowel will lengthen to reduplicate. And then lastly, the morpheme for the first aorist indicative is going to be sigma alpha, or saw. So as to me verbs, we're going to see some of these answers to these questions reflected in the information I'm going to present here on me verbs. So as we said, those verbs that end in omega in the present active indicative first person singular are called omega conjugation verbs. So verbs that don't end in omega in the first person singular, but rather end in me in the present active indicative first person singular are going to be this class of verbs called me verbs. And this is a small group of verbs as to the number of verbs that are me verbs in the Greek New Testament, but the number of times that those small number of verbs are used is quite large. That there's, you'll see often didomi, apodidomi, paradidomi, tithemi, and histemi. These are all very common verbs in the Greek New Testament. And so you need to be familiar with me verbs, and you need to be able to sort of know where to go to find out parsing information about them when you come across them. So you don't need to sort of know them like the back of your hand the way that you do omega conjugation verbs. You don't need to be as familiar with them, but you do need to know how to get information about them. So, as I said, these are our small group of me verbs that occur frequently in the Greek New Testament, and you'll notice that all of these end with me. And these are all the present active indicative first person singular forms, as also these translations indicate. So these are going to be the lexical forms or the dictionary forms that you would find if you went to look up these words in a vocabulary list or in a Greek lexicon. So that gets us all sort of our most basics about what me verbs are, where they take their names from, and what the most common me verbs in the Greek New Testament are. We're going to look a little bit about the formation of me verbs, and the sort of big takeaway here is that me verbs form their different tenses in ways that are different from the omega conjugation. So not only are they going to use different endings, in some tenses and voices, but they're also going to have sort of particular ways of forming the different tenses. And so there's going to be these, in this space here, I'm going to give us some important rules for recognizing the different tenses of me verbs, and these rules are going to make it easier for you to be able to identify what me verbs are with respect to their tense. So what I've given you up here is the basic stem of each of the most common me verbs in the Greek New Testament, and then also the present stem upon which the present and imperfect are built on. And why these changes happen will make sense in just a second when we lay out these rules here. So the first rule of me verbs is that me verbs reduplicate in the present and imperfect tenses. So normally we have associated reduplication with what tense when it comes to the omega conjugation? That's right, with the perfect tense. And our reduplication when it came to the perfect tense and when it came to consonantal reduplication, remember, was with an epsilon. So that we have le, Luca, when it comes to the perfect active indicative first person singular, that the reduplication happens with an epsilon. The me verbs are unique insofar as they reduplicate in their present and imperfect. So we're not talking about the perfect here. We'll talk about the perfect in a second. But when they do this reduplication, they don't do it with an epsilon, but they do it with a iota. So notice what has happened here is that for example, our basic stem of da for didomi, the reduplication is a repeating of the delta with an iota stuck in between that and the basic stem. And then the same thing, or a similar thing for both of these two, they has reduplicated with the hard T sound, with the t in the tau, me, and then the sigma actually reduplicates with a rough breathing mark, that the s sound of the sigma goes to a h in the reduplication there. So even though these don't look the same, they're not the exact same kind of reduplication, for both tithemi and histemi, reduplication is happening there. And then notice also, so the example I give you here of the imperfect, notice that there's still an augment. So that the imperfect indicative is going to get an augment for me verbs, and that's going to happen before the reduplication of the stem consonant there. And then when it comes to the perfect tense, me verbs are going to reduplicate in the same form that omega verbs do, namely with an epsilon, so that the da here of the stem goes to de, delta epsilon. The third rule is that me verbs often change their stem vowel. So you may have already been questioning what's going on. Why is this delta omicron here? But when I'm seeing it here and here, it's delta omega, and it's because of this rule that the stem vowel will often change, and oftentimes this is it's a lengthening or a shortening. So you see that up here as well with tithe with an epsilon versus the eta up here. So just sort of be aware that you're going to see different kinds of changes, and usually these are somewhat recognizable because they're the long or the short version of whatever stem vowel is already there on the basic stem. Another very important rule here, because it can cause confusion, because your first assumption when you see a kappa is usually to think the perfect tense. When it comes to the me verbs, they are going to use oftentimes they're going to use a kappa tense formative for the aorist instead of a sigma. This isn't a hard and fast rule, as we'll see in just a second. There are me verbs that also use a sigma, but you'll often see, so notice I say often there, use a kappa tense formative for the aorist instead of a sigma, so that the kappa alpha for me verbs equals the aorist, and it does not equal the perfect. So edo ka, notice here we have the augment. This epsilon is our augment. Then we have our basic stem with a lengthened vowel. So the da of the basic stem has gone to do. And then we have the kappa alpha of the aorist. So this would be an aorist active indicative first person singular from ditto me. And so what I want to do is review these concepts that we've just presented on the last two slides with a 4-question quick quiz here. So go ahead and pause the lecture and recall this information that I just presented to you. All right, go ahead and take about 10 seconds to look at the answers here. I should say this is a Yoda. It's got a long tail here, but take about 10 seconds to look at the answers. And let's go ahead and high five for your work. 1, 2, 3, boom. So our reduplication, me verbs will reduplicate for the present and the imperfect, but they'll reduplicate in a different way, namely with a Yoda vowel. So you'll have, I should also maybe put a consonant here, our consonant and then the Yoda vowel. So if we have ditto me here, we have our stem with a lengthened omicron goes to omega. Our basic stem is delta omicron, but is lengthened here. And then our reduplication is the di right here. And then our me is the first person singular ending. For perfect tense, for the perfect tense of me verbs, we're still going to have reduplication with the epsilon rather than the Yoda. So one of our keys to identifying the perfect is going to be that reduplication rather than this reduplication. Then the kappa alpha is not necessarily going to be our sign for the perfect tense when it comes to me verbs, but rather it's going to be a sign oftentimes for the aorist tense. So that rather than using a saw, many me verbs, and especially this is the one that you're going to see it most often with in the Greek New Testament, are going to use kappa alpha as the aorist tense morpheme. And then the stem vowel of a me verb rarely changes. That is false. It will often change, lengthening or shortening. And so what I'm giving you here is, this is a lot of information that we're not going to walk through. And that is because being able to go to these resources and find the information about me verbs is what's going to be most important for your success in translating them in the Greek New Testament. So because they are a smaller group, this is one of the reasons they're presented last in this class and in most grammars, is because they're a small group, but there's a number of them, as we've said. So what this cheat sheet does here, and I've given to you this in black and white as well, so you can print it out, is it gives you how each different tense in the indicative forms for me verbs. So just as we've done previously with the formation of different verbs, you can see the combinations and then examples of what's happening. So for the present active indicative, we have the present stem with the reduplication happening, and then the endings. And so you'll see the different things that are added for the different tenses here. So that in the imperfect, you're going to get an augment. That's also going to be the case in the other past tenses of me verbs, namely the aorist here. Notice right here we have a theta again of the passive, just like we do in the omega conjugation. So all of this to say is you're going to see a lot of similarities actually between me verbs and omega conjugation verbs as to how they're formed. But the big thing to note is that the stem, the present stem and the imperfect stem are different from one another. And then the aorist will often form, as we see here, kappa aorist with a kappa alpha. So those rules that we presented previously are sort of at play or embedded into this chart that I've given you here. And then one more chart, which again I've given you in black and white, is the different forms of the me verbs, or and particularly ditto me in this case, because this is going to be our most common me verb in the Greek New Testament. So I've given you the different tenses and voices of these here with a line over separating our present and imperfect from our aorist, because the present and the imperfect are built on that reduplicated stem. So notice that in all of these, we have the delta iota, whereas when you come over here, the aorist tense is not built on that reduplicated stem. So I give these to you in black and white, and if you don't have them handy or you don't have them printed out or up on your screen right now, I encourage you to go ahead and grab them from the course Moodle page. You don't necessarily need to print them out. You can look digitally as you go about doing this parsing practice here. But what we're going to conclude with is being able to identify the parsing information for the different me verbs on the basis of that cheat sheet. So I want you to have that cheat sheet handy and looking to it, parse each of these five different me verbs, all from ditto me, giving us tense, voice, mood, person, number, and lexical form. Our lexical form for all of these is going to be ditto me. So go ahead, on the basis of that cheat sheet, do this. Pausing the lecture, I'm going to pause as well, write down my answers, and we will come back one last time to compare. All right, so this is what our answer should look like. We're going to walk through each one. And the first thing to note is that you would not have been able to found all of the parsing information just from the paradigm cheat sheet that I gave you. So the second page of that document that gives you the different forms. You also have to look back to the formation of the me verbs to be able to get some of this information out there. So that's going to be the case with this first one because we have a future. So the future paradigm is not given on that cheat sheet there. We have a future, and our sign to the future is going to be that sigma right there. That sigma tells us we have the future. This is our basic stem with nothing added to the beginning of it. So because we don't have reduplication, either with a iota or with an epsilon, we know we don't have a present, we don't have an imperfect, we don't have a perfect. Because we don't have an augment, we don't have an aorist, we don't have an imperfect, and then the sigma is going to be our clue to the future tense. So a future active indicative, second person plural from ditto me. So this ate here is going to be our clue to the second person plural. A deduce, notice we have at the beginning an augment here, which is going to, as always in the indicative mood, narrow our options down either to the imperfect or to the aorist. And then because we have the reduplication with a iota, so we have this built on the present tense stem, that's going to let us know that we have an imperfect. And in this case, an imperfect active indicative second person singular. And you could have found this one on this sort of master paradigm sheet that I've given you. Eidoka, again, we have an augment telling us either imperfect or aorist. And then the kappa alpha here, so we have a kappa aorist. And notice that this is not built on that present tense stem as is the imperfect up here, but rather just uses the basic stem with the augment there. So that's how we know that this is going to be an aorist rather than an imperfect. So we have an aorist active indicative, and our ka is going to tell us that it's first person singular, again from ditto me, excuse me. And then didosin, notice we don't have anything at the beginning, or at least we don't have an augment at the beginning, I should say. But we do have a reduplication with Yoda, which is going to tell us that we have a present form here. If we were to have this reduplication with an augment, then we would know we're in the imperfect tense. So we're in the present here. We have a lengthened stem vowel, as often happens with me verbs. And then we have this third person singular sin ending, so that we have a present active indicative third person singular. And then number 5 here, our last one, we have a different kind of reduplication, a reduplication with epsilon. And our reduplication with epsilon is going to be our sign to the perfect rather than the present. And notice we still have the kappa here of the perfect. So the kappa is going to be used both for the perfect and for the present. And we know that this one is perfect rather than present because of the way that it reduplicates. So we have a perfect active indicative, and then the kappa epsilon here without the movable nu is our clue to the third person singular. So let's high five one more time for your work here, for your corrections here, and we'll end on that. 1, 2, 3, boom, and goodbye.